I'm standing in a neighbor's backyard. The Conservation Authority has demanded the town place EP zoning on a portion of her and many of her neighbors' properties. East Gwillmbury is already 75% plus governed by one form or another of environmental planning. Call it the Oak Ridges Moraine, significant wetlands, watershed, etc., etc. Just a little bit of history. Various versions of the amended bylaw, zoning bylaw that is, have been brought to council. The purpose of which was to bring East Gwillmbury in compliance with Conservation Authority mandates. Key issues. Number one, applying designation to more than 20,000 acres of private property. And two, accepting arbitrarily and constantly changing EP land designations, which we'll refer to as maps. Residents objected, and based on the inclusion of huge tracts of private property, essentially that portion of private lands that contained any forested areas, were to be designated environmentally planned. To appreciate the impact of this designation, we must consider: 1. Any proposed structure or modification to an existing structure, house, garage, shed, would be subject to Conservation Authority approval, without which a building permit could not be issued. An environmental assessment could be required to obtain approval. Any land sale of lands could also require environmental assessment. The cost of these environmental assessments could be very expensive and time-consuming. The value of any lands designated EP are immediately and significantly reduced, as the purchaser must accept these onerous restrictions. By accepting the Conservation Authority's sole authority to regulate land designation, the municipality gives up all powers over land designation. These maps may be modified without any scientific proof by the Conservation Authority at any time. We've already seen how arbitrary this situation occurs. The founder of the East Gwillmbury Landowners Association saw a recent change to his mapping, which all of a sudden included a portion of his property which would be EP'd. Most important, the inclusion of the maps acknowledges the Conservation Authority has the right to regulate private property. Note, Conservation Authority has on their website acknowledged that these are regulations, not laws, yet they are treated as such. Council wisely refused to pass this recommendation, and the 1997 bylaw was maintained. An excerpt from the Conservation Authority's Board of Directors meeting states that on September 14, 2017, the Conservation Authority directed East Gwillmbury to. This recommendation included that the front 60 meters of the lot would be zoned for existing use, i.e. residential, and apply EP zoning to the remainder of the lot, regardless of its size. Note, this recommendation was not supported by the town of East Gwillmbury. What's wrong with this picture? We bought and paid for this property, not the Conservation Authority. It has been proven over and over again that ownership equals pride and a desire to maintain its value. I am appalled at the unmitigated gall of some appointed, not even elected agency to presume that they should control private property. Their unfettered control of the maps grants them the extraordinary ability to what amounts to confiscation without compensation. Their regulations, not laws, permit them to deny what they seem to be deemed to be undesirable uses, impose expensive time and time-consuming requirements like environmental assessments. These powers have the following effects. Lands are significantly devalued. These devalued lands may then be purchased en masse by developers at bargain basement prices, and then magically rezoned into a wonderful development. As an example, Friday Harbor. While developers may propose to mitigate the circumstances of the EP zoning, make no mistake, this process has at least the appearance of impropriety, not to mention the virtual confiscation of existing properties. We have but to examine a recent court decision barring the OSPCA from attempting to enforce search and seizure actions. The court ruled that the OSPCA, another agency, is not a police nor a court-appointed enforcement body. As such, they clearly do not possess the power to enter private property or to interfere with a property owner's actions. While Canada has conveniently denied to incorporate property rights in the Constitution, it was a signatory of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Property rights under international law. Canada has voluntarily accepted multiple international obligations to protect property rights against government intrusion. For example, Canada is a signatory of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which recognizes that everyone has the right to own property and provides that no one shall arbitrarily be deprived of his property. This obligation is generally accepted as binding international law. But because Canada has not implemented it by legislation, it is not domestically binding. In an unprecedented move, the Conservation Authority launched its first ever appeal to LPAT, which is the OMB replacement. The Conservation Authority, municipality, and the East Gwillmbury Landowners Association applied for party status as per LPAT regulations. At the first meeting, the region of York requested an exception to the rules. It wished to be granted party status despite failing to file by the appointed deadline. As certain EGLA members had site-specific concerns, they also requested separate party status. In a subsequent LPAT written decision, the adjudicator granted York Region party status while denying the individual East Gwillmbury Landowners Association members the same courtesy. In the interest of fairness, an exception to one party should surely be granted to the other. It was agreed the parties would attempt to negotiate an amenable settlement. The Conservation Authority in the town commenced exclusive negotiations. At no point were the landowners consulted or included, despite them having party status. In a recent announcement, the provincial government stated, 1. They would be reducing the Conservation Authority's funding. 2. Conservation Authority was directed to return their efforts to the core mandate. That is clearly defined in the Conservation Authority's website. 4 items: natural hazard protection and management, conservation and management of Conservation Authority lands, drinking water source protection, and protection of the Lake Simcoe watershed, which I might add, they've cleaned up Lake Simcoe, they deserve kudos. The core mandate never included environmental protection on private property. Is this not exactly what the Conservation Authority is doing? The questions we should ask are, 1. Since when does an appointed, not elected agency presume to have authority to project their regulations, not laws, onto private property? Why is there no oversight for this appointed body? On what authority does the Conservation Authority base its decision to appeal a municipal decision? Of most importance, even if the Conservation Authority removes the environmental protection designation on private property in order to convince Council to pass the amended bylaw, their sole control of the mapping permits them to change that tomorrow. Hence their insistence at including the maps in the town bylaw. While your particular situation not be affected this time, what further steps does the Conservation Authority have in mind for tomorrow? We encourage all residents to attend the open house on September 11th, 2019, 5:30 to 8 p.m. at the Sharon Sports Complex, Canada Hall, 1914B, Mount Albert Road, between Leslie and Woodbine. Representatives from the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority and the town, and maybe the province, will be in attendance. Thank you. Okay.